Got 2 seats over here. Got a couple seats. Are those open by you there, Val? 2 seats over there. Got 1 seat over here. Tip the maitre d'. Maybe he'll find you a spot together. 1 seat over there in the corner. I'm sorry. We're crowded. There's 1 here, right here. 1 right up front. Easier for you to pay attention when you're right up front. There's 1 right there. There you go, Jimmy. Perfect. Right there. God must have had that set right set there for you, right? Just right in that spot. So yeah, it's 2 places right there, I think. All right. Well, just want to let you know about a few things upcoming. Coming up on Thursday, the 30th of this month, is a special gathering we'll have here at the church. It's a special time for prayer and the 29th, excuse me. Thank you, sis, for that correction on that. And I should just read the posters that are up all over the church, right? That would help if I just read those. So the 29th, and so that Thursday from 7 until 7, the church will be open here, and there will be an opportunity to pray for and to become more informed regarding human trafficking and the problem of human trafficking. We often think of that as something taking place in other places in the world, but in reality, there's a lot of it that takes place right here in the U.S. So we're going to have an opportunity for folks to just drop in. You don't have to come at 7 and stay till 7. You can come any time during that period of time in the day, and there'll be folks here, and you'll have an opportunity to pray and to learn more about human trafficking. So that's taking place on the 29th. Also, just letting you know, MOPS is back at MOMCO. That is our ministry to mothers with not only preschoolers, but actually moms with children of all ages who are welcome to come and spend some time in fellowship and get to know some of your neighbors and friends around. And so it's a great opportunity to come. There is childcare available for children up to school age. So that's if you'd like to bring a little one with you, get a little break, get a cup of actual hot coffee. You could actually get hot coffee if you wanted to. It wouldn't be cold by the time you got to it. That takes place, and that's happening again this Tuesday, 1st and 3rd Tuesday of every month. So also today is actually Sanctity of Life Sunday. Today is the day, that 3rd Sunday in January, in which we kind of mark the anniversary of the Roe v. Wade decision and kind of consider for a minute how that's impacted our nation. But this morning, what I like to focus on Sanctity of Life Sunday is really the sanctity of all human life. And that if we're going to be pro-life, we should be pro-every life, really, and not just selective about that. I have a feeling that in this room, I have a feeling if any of you opened your front door one morning and found a baby laying out there in a box, I doubt any of you would close the door in fear and say, oh no, I can't do that. Anybody would welcome them. If you see them as a human being, you'd see them as someone in need, someone who could use your help, and at some point you would help them along. So today we're going to talk a little bit about just the sanctity of human life and kind of the roots of God's perspective on that. And we're going to start out in the book of Genesis. So if you want to turn there with me, Genesis chapter 4. Bud, you have an announcement, I'm sorry, about our senior connection. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll be having our senior connection potluck in a week and a half.
Okay.
Wednesday, the 28th. There's a sign-up sheet up front. Our speaker will be Rob Becoxson. He'll be talking about the 2025 an update on the survivors weekend that they had, as well as a praise report on that.
All right.
And if you sign up, down at the bottom, depending on your last name, they'll give you an idea of what kind of a dish to bring. And if you get a senior discount at the market, then you're good enough for a free lunch that night.
Oh, I see. That's the qualification now. If you get a senior discount, you are a senior. That's the qualification now. Okay. I haven't had anybody ask me for quite a while whether I qualify for the senior discount. I used to get that question every now and then. Do you qualify for the senior discount? Now nobody asks me anymore. I guess I have a more honest look about me now. So Genesis chapter 4 is where we're going to begin reading this morning. And is it a little too cool for you in here? I just want to check and see. I know a lot of times people still have their coats on, and some are saying, yeah, it's cold, and others saying no. But we could maybe turn the AC up a little bit, but maybe leave the fan on, or that might help a little bit. So Genesis chapter 4, verses 1 through 9. And really, our theme this year, as we kick off this year, is the idea of make room. That's God's instruction to us, make room. We've talked about making room for various things, and I just kind of let the Lord lead me as we go down that path of thinking about making room. And today we're talking about making room, make room for more. And we'll unfold that a little bit today, but make room for more. Genesis chapter 4, we begin to see the beginnings of the human family. This is, of course, after the fall, after Adam and Eve have sinned, after they've been ejected from the garden, and now they are kind of living a life that is much more difficult, much more challenging than the life that they had in the garden. There are complications, there are questions. They don't have that daily opportunity to just spend time walking and talking with God in the garden. So worship requires a little more effort and a little more focus, as it does living in the world today, as with all its busyness, all its challenges, all the questions that it presents for us. And so we're going to pick up Genesis 4, beginning in verse 1. It says, Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. And she said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel brought that fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. And the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering. But on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. We see this sense of God's brought his approval upon Abel and demonstrated that, but for some reason, Cain's offering from the soil of the land didn't include any blood in its offering, which is what we see later in Moses' instruction. But remember, at this point, they don't have any 10 commandments to follow. They don't have the book of Leviticus telling them how they're supposed to process and do offerings correctly. So they're both seeking this opportunity to kind of worship God and seeking his favor by giving these offerings. And Abel's offering was received and accepted. Cain's was not, and Cain is downcast. It says doesn't just say he was sad, it says he was very angry. This actually caused anger to burn in him, not just sadness or sorrow. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. I mean, he gets an actual Bible study lesson from God himself. It says, Cain, God comes alongside him, gives him some counsel, some advice. Cain, I see you're downcast. I see you're angry. This is the problem. If you will walk in obedience to me, you'll have a better life. Everything will work out better for you. And what does Cain do with that advice? It said, now Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. And this was the first murder we have recorded in the Bible. And interestingly, it features prominently in this story because there aren't a ton of details that we know about Adam and Eve's life. There aren't a ton of details that we know about the lives of people around them or during that time. But here, this story just is given to us in great detail, in a sense, compared to much of what else we read from this section of the Old Testament. So for some reason, God is preserving this story for us to learn something from it. And I've often looked at this story of Cain and Abel, and I've thought, what is it that why did he feel so motivated to kill his brother Abel? I mean, it wasn't like Abel was stealing something from him. It wasn't like Abel was attempting to kill him or come after him. This wasn't self-defense. This wasn't He had no reason to feel threatened by Abel. And yet here he's motivated to the point of actually taking his life and taking this human life. And I've often thought, what is the motivation? Think about this. They both believed in God. It wasn't like one was a believer in God and one was not. They both believed in God. They were both giving an offering. They both had probably heard from their parents what God was like. In fact, Cain actually had an encounter with God himself and had this conversation with him. So they had that relationship. They knew God. They weren't so divided on that topic. They both wanted to get God's approval or grace. They both sought that through their offerings, and they came with different offerings, so they both were motivated. I look at them and they're not so diametrically opposed, really, that you would think that there would be just a constant anger or war between these two men. James chapter 4 might give us a little bit of a clue if you want to turn there. And I'm just taking a couple of verses from James chapter 4 at the very beginning in verse 1. James being from the New Testament, so it's quite a ways from Genesis, which we're in the Old Testament right now. James, interestingly, the brother of Jesus, right? This is James, who grew up in the same household where Jesus grew up. I mean, if anybody had reason to feel a little bit different than his sibling, right, it would be James, right? Because just about the time he's cooking up a plot, Jesus is saying, no, James, that's not going to work. We can't do it that way. James says, speaking of to the church, in fact, he says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but you do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and you fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. And James goes on to say that when you ask God, you don't get it because you're asking for the wrong reasons, that you might only use it for yourself. What causes fights and quarrels among you? You want something and you can't get it. What strikes me as interesting is here is God himself, who has all plenty supply for both Cain and Abel. I mean, the population of the world was pretty small at this time. You didn't have to divide stuff up very much, right? I mean, it was pretty small. The whole world in front of them, everything there. Plenty of room, plenty of space, nothing really to fight over. Why is this a competition? And here Abel brings his offering, Cain brings his. For some reason, Cain ends up angry. I believe, this is my theory, I don't believe Cain had a proper perspective on the grace of God. He believed in a limited supply of God's grace. A limited supply. And I think that's at the heart of what James is talking about. When we say, we fight, we quarrel because you have it and I don't have it and I want it and I can't get it and you seem to get it, or there's like what's called almost a sibling rivalry about how God treats you and compared to how God treats me, and there must not be enough to go around, so we fight and argue over this. And it's a perspective of scarcity. And when you have a perspective of scarcity, it causes you to hoard. It causes you to hold too tightly to things. It causes you to not be generous. It causes you to covet and desire what somebody else has and think, man, if only I had that. If I only had that they have, man, my life would be so much better. If I just had a bigger house, how my life would be so much better. And there's this sense that why should somebody else get that and not me? The Bible addresses this in the book of Proverbs often, talks about this idea of being jealous of those who have something. And so then your mind gets focused on getting what they have instead of really sensing that God has everything we need. What does James say? You don't have because you don't ask. Right? I look around me and I think, if I only had that. Here's Cain actually even having a conversation with God after his anger and frustration. And instead of saying, God, hey, you're right, I should figure this out. There should be plenty of your grace to go around, plenty abundance to go around. And here I am thinking about it's all too limited. I mean, with only two of us here, how limited could your grace be? And that, I think, is at the heart often of this aspect of the sanctity of life and the sanctity, really, of all life. If we look at other human beings as somehow competing with us for the grace of God, for the abundance of God, for the provision of God, for his favor, if somehow this is a limited supply, then we will always look suspiciously at other people. Cain did not have that perspective. Then the Lord said to Cain, and this gets interesting to me, "Where is your brother Abel?" As though God didn't know. You think God was somehow not fully informed at this point? And what does Cain reply? Again, he had a wrong perspective of God's knowledge and nature. "I don't know," he replied. And then this question, which to me is at the very heart of this whole passage, the very reason that God includes this story, is Cain's response to this. Am I my brother's keeper? He wasn't just saying, am I supposed to keep track of this guy all the time? Am I supposed to know where he is? Instead, it was a much deeper question about this idea of being a keeper or a caregiver. The two words together there, brother's keeper, are in the Hebrew, ach shamar. I want you to think about just those two words, what they unfold, the idea of ach shamar, the keeper of my brother. That word for keeper, that the root of that is the idea of a thorned fence, as though, and not a fence to keep somebody in or control them, but a fence to defend or to protect them. Am I the protector, the defender, the overseer of my brother? What a question. Am I supposed to be responsible for this person? Am I supposed to tend to them, protect them? Literally, do I place this hedge about them? The word ach is interpreted in the Old Testament often as brother, depending on, but it really just means my relation. I mean, think about Cain and Abel. Who else did they have but brother, right? It's like everybody was brothers or cousins at that point related, right? They were all siblings. And he said, am I my relative's keeper? He's virtually saying, am I the keeper of all other people here on this planet? Not just specifically that. Am I the keeper? Abundance. Our theme this morning, make room for more. Make room for more. After David, King David, who had been brought to the throne, if you understood David's journey, David wasn't just born into the palace and then wait till his dad passes away and then he gets to be king. He wasn't raised in the palace. He spent a period of time serving the existing king, Saul, who was not his relative, not his father. He spent a time serving him from the time that he was anointed king, and the prophet said, yes, you're going to be the next king of Israel. From that point forward was at least 17 years before he actually sat on the throne of Israel. And during that time, the existing king of Israel tried to kill him, was jealous of him, felt like this guy was a threat to his... So David had a front row seat to somebody else's sense of scarcity and fear and jealousy. He had a front row seat to it the whole time. But what do we see in 2 Samuel chapter 12? We see that David, one day as he is out walking around in his palace, perhaps up on a balcony somewhere, he looks down and he sees a young woman who is taking a bath. And instead of turning away and saying, okay, that's not mine, he continues to watch, and he eventually falls from that distance, not in love with her, but in lust for her, and desires to have her, even though she is somebody else's wife. So this king, this guy that the Bible says, he has a heart after God. He actually gets caught up in lusting after somebody else's wife. And so because of that, David takes her to his bed. She becomes pregnant, this very inconvenient pregnancy that she now has. David has to cover that up. So he invites the husband, who's one of his lead soldiers, back to Jerusalem and says, oh, here, why don't you take a few days off, thinking, well, while he's there, he'll sleep with his wife. That'll cover up this whole thing. It'll take care of it. Instead, The husband says, no, my men are out in the field fighting. I'm not going to indulge myself while I'm here. I'm just going to sleep outside my house, in fact, and then go back. So that plan didn't work. So then David says, you take this guy. He sends a note with him, has him carry this note to the general. Says, you take this note to the general. He takes the note to the general. What does the note say? Put this guy in the front line as you attack the city. And as soon as they start to fight back, you all draw back and leave him there. Virtually just prescribing his murder. So he carries this letter to the general, says, hey, some special news from the king. General reads and goes, yeah, some special news. Kills this husband. Thinks he's covered the whole thing up. And instead, Nathan the prophet hears from God about what David has done. Comes and confronts him with a story about a man whose pet sheep virtually was taken from him by a rich man because the rich man didn't want to use his own. And so David is confronted by that. And then Nathan said to David, because David's going, when he hears the story, he's like, well, who is this guy that took this sheep? I'll kill him. Nathan says, you are the man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Now listen to what the Lord said to David. I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. Saul, who tried to kill you on a number of occasions, I delivered you every time from his hand. I gave you your master's house. You now live in the palace that was Saul's. I've given you even your master's wives that you now have control over. I gave you all of Israel and Judah, both houses. For a while he was just king over part of Israel. He said, I've given you all of Israel and Judah. And he goes on to say this, and if all this had been too little, I would have given you even what? More. Even more. David responds out of fear. He responds out of lust. He responds out of envy. I've got this, but I don't have that yet. And so he goes after it. And instead of considering that God is abundant and provides all that we need, it's almost like he responds out of fear that he's missing out on something and goes after it. I would have given you even more. This verb that's there, to give more, is to, I would increase, and I would do it again, and I would do it again, and I would do it again. You say, I would give you more, and then more, and then more if it weren't enough. That's quite a verb. That's quite an action on God's part to do that. In Mark chapter 12, I know we're jumping around a lot this morning. Mark chapter 12. This is an interesting episode from the life of Jesus when he's there with his disciples and they're sitting by the temple and they're watching where people drop their money in. 12, beginning in verse 41 in the book of Mark. It says, Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings are put, and he watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus thought this is a really great teaching moment. Maybe they even noticed what she had done. He said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. How is it more? How is it that? They all gave out of their wealth, but she out of her poverty put in everything, all that she had to live on. Who would have thought that she walked away from there thinking, I've done more? I imagine most people would walk away thinking, I didn't do very much today. That's all I could do. Did she think that even that little that she gave was more? It was an abundance, that God viewed that differently even than all the rest had given? So sometimes even when we look at ourselves and our own situation and we think to ourselves, how can I do more? That God says, no, you could still do more. Jesus actually told his disciples, because he had knowledge of this, by the way, this woman put in everything she had. Everything she had. she had to have a pretty different perspective on the nature of God than Cain did, or than David did. To have the sense that I could take everything I own, put it in, and yet God would still take care of me with abundance. That God still has more that I have. It's our perspective on God and our perspective on his abundance. She put in everything she had to live on. Ephesians 3, the passage that I read this morning, talks about he is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. The idea at the root of that more is the root hupo in the Greek, which means above or beyond. And in reality, both that word is used twice in that phrase. He's able to do above and beyond all that you ask or think. Above and beyond all that you ask or think. You know, even as we look at the idea of human trafficking, one of the challenges with human trafficking is you don't just go set people free, turn them loose, and now they build a life. Oftentimes there are circumstances surrounding that person. Poverty, lack of education, lack of opportunity, whatever it might be, addiction, that has gotten them into that place. And if they're not helped along, if we don't come along with a sense that we have something to offer, and we're willing to give and to provide more for that to change for them, all you do is say, okay, you're no longer being trafficked, or we've passed a law, or we've passed a regulation, and we've caught the people who did this to you. You're free now to go. The problem is they still are bound, really. They are in bondage to whatever led them to that place to begin with. So it takes a people who have an attitude and a perspective of abundance to come alongside people who are in that situation and really help them. And the thing is, what I find fascinating is, as much as this kind of catches our passion, even as Christians, how few places there are actually fully supported who actually help women, as particularly young women, who are in sex trafficking, actually build a new life. Because that's what has to happen. And you don't do that without a real attitude of abundance, right? You don't open your door to that. You don't open the treasury chest. You don't say, what can we do to help, unless you sense that God is partnering with you in that process. Luke chapter 10. Flip. Here we go. Here's a counter, really, I think, to the Cain and Abel story. A counter especially to the shamar question that Cain asked. Am I my brother's keeper? Is that my job? Jesus is having a conversation with some teachers of the law. And they're talking about the greatest commandment. And they're like, well, the greatest commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the other is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. Wow, that's what a great set of rules and laws to live by. What a great commandment to live by. What a great idea that is. But somebody wanted to justify himself. So here, beginning Luke 10, beginning in verse 29. Somebody wanted to justify himself. One of those religious leaders wanted to say, but just so I know how to budget the grace that I have, just so I know how to make sure that goes to the right places. I used to say, in fact, I got to speak at a friend's memorial service one time, and this is a friend that was one of the founders of our church here. And his name was Jack Rudd. And Jack was the guy who came to the board meetings with a big idea and sent everybody going, how are we going to ever do that? I guarantee you the fact that we are in a building today was because Jack Rudd sat at a board meeting and said, we need to do this. And everybody else said, how are we going to do it? And Jack said, I don't know. God just wants us to do it. We'll get it done. And so when I was speaking at his memorial service, I said, you know, when you work in church leadership or organizational leadership, you find out there are particularly in Christian organizations, you find there are two kinds of people on boards, and you need them both. One is the bean counters. You need people who keep track and figure out where's this going to go, where's that going to go, how that, keep an account. It's got to be there. I said, and then the most frustrating people are the people who believe in unlimited beans. Jack believed in unlimited beans. And because he believed in unlimited beans, right, we now have a facility and a ministry here. You know that we're coming up on almost 50, we're almost at 50 years that this church has been in existence. And I'm talking, that's almost 50 years that Jack Rudd was there poking the board going, hey guys, we can do this. We can take the next step. We can get to the next place. And it's because of that we have women's Bible studies and men's Bible studies and Sunday school and VBS and all of that going on because somebody said, God's got enough beans to get this done. Right? That right perspective. And you will never have a truly pro-life perspective until you believe in a God with unlimited beans. Because if you're always counting them, you're always going to try to figure out where they go. So here's a bean counter coming up to Jesus saying, okay, love your neighbor as yourself, but that gets a little crazy. So he wanted to justify his actions and his perspective, so he said to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? And I know Jesus was going, oh, I've been waiting for this question. I got such a story to tell you. And I have a feeling it was a real story. I don't think Jesus had to make up stories. I think he knew stories, right? He just knew. I mean, I love as a pastor when I get to tell a real story, because to me there's something powerful about a real story than just a made-up story. So I think this was a real story that took place. Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. I'm reminded of the words of a friend one time who said, you know, I know we live in a fallen world, but sometimes I feel like it's all fallen on me. This guy felt like this fallen world had fallen on him. Thieves, robbers, people who will take what you have, the things we very likely defend ourselves against as much as we can. And here he falls into the hands, and they beat him, leave him for dead. It says a priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. Remember, they stripped him of his clothes. Very likely, you couldn't tell who he was, what his station in life was, whether he was from Jerusalem or whether he was a Samaritan, because the markings that would have said to somebody, oh, this is a man of means, or this is if they were just left there. The other is they left him for dead. So a priest who is going to the temple to do his work or to make an offering, he can't touch a dead body and continue to do that. So he, in case this guy just really is dead, he would have to go through this whole process of cleansing if it were done. So he's on the other side of the road evaluating what his response should be. Probably, if he had a watch, he'd be looking at it, right? Going, I got places to be. I don't think there's anything I can do here. I don't have anything with me. There's nothing I can do. So he walks by on the other side. So to a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. Same way. Jesus is pointing out that you can look at just the law and you can define it as narrowly as you want and say, well, my neighbor has to be somebody like close by, right? Like it's got to be somebody. What he's asking is Cain's question. Am I my brother's keeper? Am I here to tend to, care for, watch over people that I maybe don't even know? Is everybody here? Think about it. We're all related. We're all related. So he's saying, am I the keeper of this person? This is what this guy is asking. The same Cain's question right up here again. But a Samaritan, now the Samaritans were the despised group. You didn't have very few Jews living in Judea or up north in Galilee would have much to do with Samaritans. Samaritans were worshiping false gods. They had separated themselves from Israel. Many of them were mixed race people. They weren't pure Jewish because they had been that area had been resettled during the time of the Babylonian exile. Some of that had been, so these were mixed race people. They weren't us. They weren't our. His real question is, are those people our neighbors? Do I have to count like those people a neighbor? Or is he talking about just the people who are like within our group? So he picks one of those people. He picks one of the others to be a hero of the story. Always love this, right? I mean, talk about being politically incorrect. He picks a foreigner to be the hero of this story. He came by where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him there. The next day, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. That's basically like 2 days' wages he took out. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have, or any more expense you might have. So this Samaritan plays the role, really, of the grace of God coming into this guy's life. The fallen world has fallen on this guy. He is just needing help. Nobody knows that's walking by. Did he get into this trouble by his own hand? Is this something he did to himself? Is this maybe a robber that tried to rob somebody and then got left there? What's the story? We often want to know, what's the story? How'd you get into this situation, right? Because what we want to do is lecture somebody on how to avoid getting into this situation. But in fact, a fallen world had fallen right on him, and who comes along to help but this Samaritan? And that Samaritan himself is playing the role of the grace of God in this guy's life, caring not who he is, caring not where he came from, caring not what would come. He just takes pity on him and says, here, I'll come and help you. And then when he says to the innkeeper, he doesn't say, hey, here's 2 days' wages. That's quite a bit. You should be able to take care of him with that. He says, no, if you need more, I'll have it for you. Do we think of a God who says, Bart, take on this task, and if you need more, I'll give it to you. Take on this person, and if you need more, I'll give it to you. Be your brother's keeper, and if you need more, I'll give it to you. The way you make room for more in your life is by using what God's already given you. It's not by building bigger barns and making more storage. It's by using what God's given you with what's right in front of you and making a difference with that and being the keeper of your brother in that process of caring for those that God puts across your path. And being ready for God to say, here's more if you need it. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? Jesus asked, right? Like, obvious answer. The expert in the law replied, well, the one who had mercy on him. And he goes, just go and do likewise. Now I get to tell you a story. We've talked about a couple of stories, but I'm going to tell you about a different story. So back about the time that Roe v. Wade, the Roe v. Wade decision had been overturned by the Dobbs decision at the Supreme Court, and we're all going, yay, it's all over with. It's not really over with, by the way, because people who are in difficult or challenging pregnancy situations still need people to come along, protect, serve, encourage, and bless them. You can't just say to somebody, hey, we know you're in a tough spot. We've given you no options. Now do this. But the media picked up on a kind of one of those media darlings that they wanted to focus on. And this was a young lady by the name of Brooke, lived in Texas. Texas was 2 days away from clamping down on abortion and saying no more, or making it at 6 weeks, cutting the cutoff date. So Brooke was pregnant. She and her boyfriend had been going out for a few months. She felt she was probably more than 6 weeks along, but she wasn't sure. So she figured, I've got to go somewhere and find out. She had taken the pregnancy test, so she knew she was pregnant, but she didn't know how far along she was. She needed a place to go where she could kind of get that determined, but she didn't have money to go to a doctor clinic to find out how pregnant she was, and she was a little concerned about that. What do I do if somebody finds out about that with this law that's changing? So she looked up a pregnancy center in her area. This is a pro-life pregnancy center. She looked it up. They had an ultrasound. So she went to this pregnancy center, and she had an ultrasound done and found out she was pregnant with twins. Talk about trouble. No offense, twins. No offense to twins. So she's like now stuck with this big decision. She and her boyfriend are still together. She feels like he's a good guy, and they're trying to make this decision. And everybody's doing all the very supportive stuff. Well, you do what you feel you need to do. You make your decision. If you need, we'll take you to New Mexico where you can get this done. You don't have to rush into this. But she had gone to this pro-life center, and once she saw that ultrasound of those twins, once she knew this was 2 lives that she was talking about, not just one. She's 18 years old, got her whole life ahead of her, all these plans, all these things she was planning to do. And so what happened is the media picked up on that, and they wanted to show her. It says, from a secular media outlet working overtime to portray the trauma of a young woman trapped in a pregnancy. She had 48 hours to get an abortion before Texas heartbeat law went into effect. Unable to get that appointment, she visited a pro-life pregnancy center where she learned she was 3 months pregnant and her twins had strong beating hearts. This mother, the father of the babies, and their 2 babies are living witnesses to the good that comes from choosing life. They chose to have these 2 babies. So later on, of course, the media comes back and wants to show how challenging this must be, right, for a young mother. And what they show is a smiling young mother of 2 babies. Her husband now is in the Air Force. He's completed his basic training. They are married, and she's getting great support from her family. I mean, she had a lot of things working for her, but and what they show is this young woman who's, yes, busy, who's talking about how life is kind of hard, but it's like, I wouldn't trade it. She said, I shudder to think what would have happened if I hadn't gone to that pro-life pregnancy center. If a clinic had been open, if I'd been able to just go in. I shudder to think, because I look at my babies now and I think, because she was afraid that there wasn't enough, that she wouldn't be enough, that they wouldn't be enough for these 2 twins. So as I was following the story, I saw that there was a GoFundMe page that had gotten started. Of course, she got this notoriety. Somebody started a GoFundMe page, might have even started it herself, thinking, man, this, got all this stuff. We're going to need a lot of beans to get this done. You know what I mean? And that's one of the greatest fears. Like, babies cost money. I remember my pastor, when I was thinking about getting married, Tina and I were engaged. We were talking about it. We hadn't really fully announced to everybody. And I was working, and I asked my pastor, I said, Pastor, how much money should a guy have to get married? He said, Bart, how much money should you have to stay married? It was a great question, right? Because it was like, you will never have enough money to get married. How much money does it take to have a kid? You will never have enough money to have a kid. If you do all the math before they get here, you will choose to invest in something else. But once they get here, you can't think of anything else you'd rather do. Like I said, I can't think of a person here, if you opened your door and found a baby on your doorstep, that would just shudder in fear and close the door and think, we don't have enough for that. Right? You just wouldn't do it. So I love this story. So this is a letter, a short note written by Rebecca Davis. She sent $25 to their GoFundMe page. By the way, they were trying to raise $90,000. Sounds like a lot of money. For twins? Oh, come on. You're going to need more than that. But still, this was like, we got to have these beans in, right? You know that they've raised over $87,000 on that GoFundMe page? I think God saw this coming, right? And he just sent people. But what I love is this letter of encouragement that was sent to her. It says, hi, Brooke and Billy. I read an article about y'all. I love that. Y'all. In the news. And it reminded me so much of my own story that I had to give and write it to you and send it to you. Only I am the twin in this story, not the parent. My parents were both teenagers. They dropped out of high school when they found out that they were pregnant, also with twins. They were considering an abortion as well, but at that time ultrasounds weren't really a thing. But my mom got really sick and had to go to the hospital, so they did an ultrasound there as a precaution. The minute they heard the word twins, they decided to keep my sister and I. I want to let you know that your sacrifice for your girls is beautiful. You've already given them the best gift you could give, the gift of life. The next thing you can give them is priceless, but it won't cost you a penny. That's unconditional love. It does not matter about material goods. Your girls will know that they are wanted and they are loved. I know that it's a sacrifice to put all your dreams on hold for a little while, but it's only for a season. My dad went on to get his bachelor's degree, paid for by the U.S. Air Force, and eventually his master's degree. He did have a chance later to follow his dreams and to also enjoy watching my sister and I follow our dreams as well. And now he's a doting grandfather, watching his grandchildren grow up. Being selfless and giving for your children is a beautiful thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Make room for more. You see, I think one of the greatest messages the church can have is not, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, but instead, we have a God of abundance. And when you have a need, he is right there. And when you choose his path, he takes care of you through that path. Walk in that. Know that God loves you. He loves your baby. He loves the life that they're going to live. Fascinating to me. I couldn't help, and maybe it's just about getting old, right? Just getting older. So yesterday, we had a baby shower here at the church. And I was thinking about this yesterday, and I talked to Suzanne because we go back a long ways too, and Tina. And I said, 2 kids that we had here at our school almost 40 years ago, I am going to the baby shower of their grandchild. I can remember baby showers for their children, but now for their grandchild. And what's interesting is you look around a room of people you've known since, some of them since they were born. Many of these visitors and cousins that were there, these are people I've known since they were born. And you think sometimes, man, when a baby's coming in, it's almost a scary thought to some people. It's like, what am I going to do? And now here are all these just people walking around, right? With purpose and with ideas and with plans, places they're going to go and things they're going to do, because somebody was unafraid, because somebody just said, God will take care of this. God is a God of more. What we have to do is make room for more. Now in Calaveras County, we have a pro-life pregnancy center. And believe me, in California, where abortion is still wide open, and oftentimes what we're facing today not only is the actual physical abortions that are performed, but also now medical abortions or using medicine or chemicals for abortion, that those are also a thing. So you can put all the kind of boundaries up you want to try, but what you'll find is that fear has a way of finding a way through all of those. I mean, this young lady could have chosen to go to the next state and have an abortion. She could have chosen any number of things, but it was a pro-life center with an ultrasound that showed her the reality of the life in her. She said when they were interviewing about this pro-life center that she went to, like, did they force you to do this and did they force you to do that? She's like, no, I just felt like these are people who would help me. I felt like they were people who would support me either way that I went. I felt loved and cared for because she found people who believed in the abundance of God, who believed that there's room for every life here. Would you bow your heads with me this morning? Father, I thank you that you encourage us to see your abundance, your provision at every turn, to know that when we are afraid and it involves people, you have a plan. So Lord, I lift up to you anyone here this morning that has been injured, who's been injured by this fallen world, injured by its message of fear, its message of scarcity, who's been caught up in that and bought that lie. I pray for your healing hand of forgiveness and grace to be at work in their lives today. Just as you say, when we come to you, everything's new and starts over again. So Lord, I ask you to do that for them today, to find forgiveness and grace in you, because not only are you abundant in provision, you're abundant in grace and in love for the innocent as well as the guilty. Lord, I lift up those young people we have here in our congregation today. I pray that you will help them stay a path of purity and righteousness before you, living out the path and plan that you have for their lives with confidence. But also, Lord, that you would give them courage, perhaps when they encounter a friend or somebody who is facing a really difficult decision, fearful about the future. I pray that they will have a message of a God of abundance of grace and abundance of provision to share with them. And I ask you to help us, Lord, whether it is about human trafficking, whether it is about those who are seeking a refuge, if it is those who are seeking help. Father, that we would be like that Good Samaritan, willing to give even more because we serve a God of more. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. God bless you this morning. I pray that you have a great week ahead.